The recession comes after 6 months of good growth. So are things really that bad? Well, I spoke to Shihoko Goto, Senior Northeast Asia Associate at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and asked if she was surprised by the downturn.
Was this expected? Was this in line with forecasts? Yes. Is this disappointing? Certainly. And I think the really big issue is how is Japan actually going to get out of this cycle of hitting recessionary trends and actually moving into positive growth for a sustained amount of time. And there are a number of hurdles to be overcome.
Let me try to simplify what is a very complicated situation, but what caused this recession to happen?
Well, there are really two things. One obvious one, if you look at the numbers, capital expenditure has dropped significantly. And the second one is a little bit more difficult to analyze because it's really the impact of the Chinese economic downturn. And I think that's a significant one. Japan's big trading partner is China. And as we know, there has been a lot of concern about Chinese economic outlook moving forward. And there is a lot of apprehension in Japan to move ahead in investing in China, investing in overseas. And the challenge, one of the big challenges for Japanese companies moving ahead is what to do with their money that they're sitting on right now. How can they invest intelligently? And they're getting scared.
I don't understand why they can't find places to invest. I mean, Asia is one of the fastest growing places on earth right now. And the U.S. isn't doing all that badly as well. I can see why they don't want to invest in Europe right now. But It would just seem to me that if I'm a professional money manager sitting in Japan, there should be a lot of opportunities around.
Right. And also, I mean, on the domestic front as well, let's not forget that TPP, even though there is a lot of concern about it actually being ratified, I'm in the camp that it will actually be ratified perhaps a little bit later than we had hoped for, but it will actually go forward. And that will create a lot of new opportunities. And there are opportunities not just in China, but in Southeast Asia. But the question is, do they have the appetite to handle that kind of risk? And right now, people are playing it conservatively.
Some critics have said that part of the issue is the fact that there isn't talented workers and opportunities for them to push these investments that you're speaking of. How valid are those concerns?
I think they're not invalid. I don't think that's the driving force, but certainly the lack of qualified personnel. Japan, as we know, has a tremendous demographic challenge, but it's more pressing than that. The more talented Japanese tend to work for non-Japanese companies, or they're increasingly finding opportunities overseas. And there is that kind of talent or what we call a brain drain as well.
Well, you mentioned the demographics. It's and for our audience, it's the issue of basically an older workforce that's retiring without the numbers of younger workforce to replace it. I don't know how you solve that problem because you can't fix that overnight.
No, it isn't a quick fix at all, and it's going to not just have implications for the workforce, but also on the fiscal side, it's draining Japan's coffers. It is a social problem as well, and there is a growing income gap in Japan that is possibly going to lead to greater social uncertainty. So those are some of the major political challenges that Prime Minister Abe really has to tackle.
So here's the billion-dollar question. You could argue that Abenomics worked and then did not work because of this recession. What I'm curious of is, do things get worse before they get better?
Well, there had been talks about increasing Japan's consumers' consumption tax once again. That's actually been shelved because of these not so great numbers. It isn't necessarily rosy, but it's not as bleak as you might expect. Let's remember that the IMF is expecting Japan's GDP for this year to be around 0.8. It expects it to be around double that for next year, and that estimate still remains unchanged.